The rain in Seoul didn't wash things clean. It just made the neon lights bleed onto the asphalt, turning the streets of Gangnam into a kaleidoscope of oil and electric blue. Inside the Velvet Lotus, however, the weather was irrelevant. Here, the air was conditioned to a crisp 68 degrees, scented with sandalwood and the metallic tang of expensive champagne. Amara adjusted the microphone stand, her fingers tracing the cold steel. She was the only thing in the room that felt entirely real. Standing under the single spotlight, her dark skin caught the luminescence, glowing with a richness that seemed to absorb and reflect the light all at once. Her braids were pulled back into an elegant, high bun, leaving her neck bare, a deliberate choice to show she had nothing to hide, even in a room full of men who hid everything. She was a jazz singer from Chicago living a life she hadn't quite planned in South Korea, a place where she stood out like a drop of ink in a glass of milk. Yet that distinctiveness was exactly why she was the star attraction at the most exclusive underground club in the city. Amara closed her eyes and let the first note of "I Put a Spell on You" roll off her tongue. It was low, guttural, and soaked in a melancholy that silenced the clinking of crystal glasses in the VIP booths. She sang not for the applause, but to drown out the tension that vibrated through the floorboards of this place. The Velvet Lotus wasn't just a jazz club. It was neutral ground for the heavy hitters of the underworld, a place where truces were toasted and hits were ordered in the same breath. And the owner of this beautiful, dangerous cage was watching her. He always did. Jae-hyun sat in the center booth on the mezzanine level, a vantage point that allowed him to see every entrance and every face. To the uninitiated, he was a venture capitalist, a handsome chaebol heir with a taste for nightlife. To the streets, he was the ghost of Seoul, the head of the Cheonsa syndicate. He was a man carved from ice and discipline. His suit was bespoke, Italian wool tailored to fit broad shoulders that carried the weight of a criminal empire. His hair was jet black, swept back to reveal a face that was devastatingly handsome but utterly void of emotion. His dark eyes, usually restless and scanning for threats, were currently fixed on the woman on stage. Jae-hyun swirled the amber liquid in his glass, mesmerizingly still. He had hired Amara 6 months ago after hearing her sing in a hole-in-the-wall bar in Itaewon. He had offered her 10 times her salary, an apartment in Hanamdong, and protection. In exchange, she belonged to the Lotus. She was his siren. He admired the way she commanded the room, the way she didn't shrink under the gazes of the wolves he invited in. There was a fire in her, a resilience that reminded him of things he had lost long ago. He signaled his second-in-command, a scarred man named Kang, with a subtle flick of his wrist. Kang leaned down, listening to the whisper that was barely audible over the music, then nodded and disappeared into the shadows. Down on the stage, Amara finished her set. The applause was polite, restrained, as was the custom here. She bowed slightly, the sequins on her midnight blue dress shimmering, and stepped out of the light. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Tonight felt different. The energy in the room was jagged. She had seen men enter earlier, men with accents from the southern provinces, men who didn't look like the usual clientele. She made her way backstage, navigating the narrow corridor lined with black velvet. She just wanted to grab her coat, exit through the rear staff door, and disappear into the anonymity of the subway. "Ms. Jones," a voice rumbled from the shadows. Amara froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob of her dressing room. She turned to find Kang standing there, his hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Min requests your company for a drink." It wasn't a question. It never was. Amara swallowed the lump in her throat. In 6 months, Jae-hyun had never invited her to his table. He observed, he paid, he ensured she was safe home, but he never engaged. "I'm tired, Kang. It's been a long week." "He insists," Kang said, stepping aside to clear the path toward the private elevator that led to the owner's suite. Amara tightened her jaw, her survival instincts warring with her curiosity. She nodded once, composing herself, and walked past Kang. She was a woman who had navigated the tough streets of Chicago. She wouldn't let a Korean mobster see her tremble. The elevator ride was silent and swift. When the doors opened, she stepped into a room that was less an office and more a fortress. The walls were glass, overlooking the club below, soundproof to a dull hum. Jae-hyun was standing by the window, his back to her. "Thank you for coming," he said, his English perfect, though tinged with a cold, clipped accent. He turned around, and for the first time, Amara saw him up close without the barrier of stage lights. He was intimidatingly tall, radiating a kind of leashed violence. But his eyes, there was a weary depth to them. "You don't usually ask the help to drink with you, Mr. Min," Amara said, keeping her voice steady as she walked further into the room. She refused to sit until invited. "You are hardly help, Amara," he replied, using her first name. It sounded intimate and foreign on his tongue. He walked to a small bar cart and poured a glass of wine, holding it out to her. "You are the soul of this place. Without you it is just a room full of criminals in expensive suits." Amara took the glass, her fingers brushing against his. His skin was cold. "And what are you? Just another criminal in an expensive suit." Jae-hyun's lips twitched, almost a smile. "I'm the one who pays for the suits. Please sit." He gestured to a leather sofa. They sat across from each other. The air between them was thick with unsaid things. Amara took a sip of the wine. It was a heavy red that tasted of dark berries and oak. "Why am I here, Jae-hyun? And don't tell me it's to discuss music." Jae-hyun set his glass down. His demeanor shifted, the mask of the charming host slipping to reveal the strategist beneath. "You are perceptive. I like that about you. The atmosphere tonight, you felt it." "I felt something," she admitted. "Tension, static." "Betrayal," he corrected softly. "There is a shift in the wind. My position is being challenged by a faction from Busan, and I have reason to believe they have infiltrated my inner circle." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring intently at her. "I brought you up here because the floor is no longer safe. Not tonight." Amara's blood ran cold. "If it's not safe, I should leave. I should go home." "No," he said sharply, then softened his tone. "The exits are being watched. If you leave now alone, you become a target simply because you are associated with me. They will think you carry information, or they will use you to get to me." Amara stood up, anger flaring to mask her fear. "So I'm a hostage, is that it? I didn't sign up for this war, Jae-hyun. I sing songs, that's it." Jae-hyun stood as well, towering over her. He reached out, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not touching, a gesture of unexpected restraint. "You are not a hostage. You are under my protection. There is a difference. I will not let anything happen to you." Before Amara could respond, the lights in the club below flickered and died. A split second later, the muffled, rhythmic thumping of the bass was replaced by the chaotic, sharp cracks of gunfire. Screams, faint even through the soundproofing, began to rise. Jae-hyun moved with a speed that blurred the air. He grabbed Amara's arm, firmly but not painfully, and pulled her away from the glass wall. "Get down," he commanded, his voice steel. He kicked a button under his desk, and heavy steel shutters began to descend over the glass, sealing them in. "What is happening?" Amara gasped, her heart slamming against her ribs. "The coup has started," Jae-hyun said, pulling a sleek silver handgun from a holster beneath his jacket. He checked the chamber with practiced ease. "Stay behind me. Do not make a sound." Suddenly, the elevator chimed. It wasn't Kang. The doors slid open to reveal two men in dark tactical gear, masks covering their faces. They raised their weapons. Jae-hyun didn't hesitate. He fired 2 shots, precise and deafening in the enclosed space. The men dropped before they could fully step out of the car. The smell of gunpowder instantly filled the room, acrid and burning. Amara clapped her hands over her ears, trembling. This wasn't a movie. This was blood and death feet away from her. Jae-hyun turned to her, his face a mask of grim determination. He grabbed her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. "We have to move. The elevator is compromised. We take the private stairwell." I can't do this," Amara stammered, her legs feeling like lead. Jae-hyun gripped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. His dark eyes locked onto hers, burning with intensity. "Look at me, Amara. You survived a life before this. You are strong. I see it in you every night. I need you to be strong now. Trust me." There was something in his voice, a plea buried under the command, that grounded her. She took a ragged breath and nodded. Okay, okay. Good. He released her face and took her hand again. Run when I say run. He led her to a bookshelf that swung open to reveal a narrow concrete staircase. As they stepped into the darkness of the stairwell, the heavy steel door of the office groaned under the impact of a battering ram. The enemy was inside. Run, he whispered. They descended into the dark belly of the building, the sound of chaos echoing above them. Amara wasn't just a singer anymore, and Jae-hyun wasn't just her boss. They were two souls bound by adrenaline and blood, plummeting into a night that promised no dawn. This was no longer about business. It was about survival, and for the first time, the ghost of Seoul looked like a man who had something to lose. The concrete stairwell was cold, smelling of damp dust and old grease, a stark contrast to the perfumed air of the club above. Their footsteps echoed sharply, a rhythmic clatter that seemed too loud in the confined space. Amara kicked off her heels without breaking stride, leaving the expensive shoes behind on the third landing. She needed traction, not height. Jae-hyun noticed the movement, his grip on her hand tightening briefly in acknowledgement, but he didn't slow down. He was a force of nature, moving with a predatory grace that pulled her along in his wake. They descended 3 floors in seconds, bypassing the main club levels and heading straight for the subterranean service tunnels. The main garage will be a kill zone, Jae-hyun said, his voice low and devoid of panic, though a bead of sweat traced the line of his jaw. They will expect me to take the Maybach. We are going to the maintenance bay. They burst through a heavy fire door at the bottom of the stairs, spilling out into a long, fluorescent-lit corridor lined with pipes and buzzing electrical boxes. The air here was thick with the smell of garbage and bleach. Distant shouts echoed from the floors above, muffled by layers of concrete, but the threat felt hot on their necks. Jae-hyun didn't hesitate. He navigated the labyrinth of the Lotus's underbelly as if he had memorized the blueprints, which, Amara realized, he almost certainly had. He holstered his gun but kept his hand hovering near it, his eyes scanning every shadow, every intersection. As they rounded a corner near the laundry chutes, a man stepped out from a side room. He was wearing the uniform of a busboy, but the silenced pistol in his hand told a different story. Before the assassin could raise the weapon, Jae-hyun surged forward. It happened in a blur, a sickening crack of bone, a swift disarm, and the man crumpled to the floor, unconscious or worse. Amara gasped, pressing her hand to her mouth to stifle a scream. The violence was efficient, brutal, and terrifyingly casual. Keep moving, Jae-hyun commanded, not even looking down at the body. He grabbed her arm again, pulling her past the fallen man. Don't look at him, Amara, look at me. They reached the end of the corridor where a rusted metal door led to the maintenance garage. Jae-hyun punched a code into a keypad, not a digital one but an old mechanical lock that looked forgotten. The door groaned open. Inside, surrounded by cleaning equipment and crates of liquor, sat a dusty, nondescript gray sedan. It looked like a car a grandmother would drive, utterly unremarkable. Get in, he said, opening the passenger door for her. Amara slid into the leather seat, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The interior smelled of old leather and oil. Jae-hyun vaulted into the driver's seat and keyed the ignition. The engine didn't sputter. It roared to life with a deep, throaty growl that vibrated through the chassis. This was a sleeper car, a tank disguised as a relic. He slammed the car into gear, tires screeching on the polished concrete as he gunned it toward the service ramp. Put your seatbelt on, he said calmly, spinning the steering wheel with one hand while checking the rearview mirror. As the car shot up the ramp and burst through the flimsy wooden barrier onto the rainy backstreet, the world exploded into chaos. 2 black SUVs were idling near the rear exit, waiting. As soon as Jae-hyun's gray sedan appeared, gunfire erupted. Bullets sparked against the body of the car, pinging loudly like hail on a tin roof. Get down, Jae-hyun shouted, his hand shooting out to push Amara's head toward her knees. Amara curled into a ball, her hands over her head, feeling the car swerve violently. The sound of glass shattering filled the cabin as the rear window blew out. Jae-hyun cursed in Korean, a sharp, biting sound. He floored the accelerator, the modified engine screaming as the sedan fishtailed on the wet asphalt before gripping the road and rocketing forward. The force pressed Amara back into the seat. She turned her head just enough to see the SUVs peeling out behind them, their headlights blinding in the rain-slicked darkness. "They're following us," she yelled, her voice trembling. "Let them try," Jae-hyun grimaced. He took a sharp right turn, drifting the car through a narrow alleyway barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Sparks flew as the side mirror scraped against a brick wall. The maneuver bought them a few seconds. They emerged onto a wider avenue, the neon lights of Gangnam blurring into streaks of pink and blue. The chase was on. The SUVs were heavy, powerful, but Jae-hyun drove with the precision of a surgeon. He wove through the late-night traffic, running red lights and cutting across lanes, using civilian cars as shields. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the city into a shimmering, dangerous blur. Amara watched Jae-hyun's profile. He was completely focused, his eyes darting between the road and the mirrors. He wasn't scared, he was in his element. It was terrifying, but strangely it made her feel safe. If anyone could get them out of this, it was him. "Hold on," he warned. He slammed on the brakes, sending the car into a controlled spin in the middle of an intersection. The leading SUV, unable to stop in time, shot past them, slamming into a parked delivery truck. Metal crunched and steam hissed into the night air. Jae-hyun didn't wait to see the damage. He shifted gears and sped off in the opposite direction, taking a highway on-ramp that led out of the district. Minutes stretched into an agonizing hour. Jae-hyun took a circuitous route, doubling back, taking underpasses, and constantly checking for a tail. Finally, the adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by a cold, aching exhaustion. The city skyline receded behind them, replaced by the darker, quieter roads of the outskirts. The rain softened to a steady drizzle. "Are you hurt?" Jae-hyun asked, breaking the silence. His voice was hoarse. Amara checked herself. She was shaking, her dress was ruined, and her feet were cold, but she was intact. "No, I'm fine, just shaken." She looked at him. "You're bleeding." There was a dark stain spreading on the white sleeve of his dress shirt, high up on the shoulder. "A graze from the glass, nothing more," he dismissed, though his grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled. "Where are we going?" Amara asked, looking out the window at the passing industrial complexes and shipping yards. This wasn't the glitz of Seoul anymore. This was the working arteries of the country. "Incheon," Jae-hyun replied. "I have a safe house near the docks. It is off the books. No one knows about it except me, not even Kang." The mention of his second-in-command hung in the air. "Do you think Kang—" Amara couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know who to trust right now," Jae-hyun said, his eyes hardening. "That is why we are alone. Tonight, the only person I know is not trying to kill me is you." They pulled into a desolate area filled with stacks of shipping containers. Jae-hyun navigated through the maze of metal boxes until he reached a rusted warehouse at the edge of the water. He killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the rain tapping on the roof and the ticking of the cooling engine. Jae-hyun turned to her. In the dim light of the dashboard, he looked tired. The invincible crime lord mask had slipped, revealing a man who had just narrowly escaped death. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I never intended for my world to touch yours." Amara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the blood on his shoulder, the tension in his jaw. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and touched the uninjured side of his face. His skin was warm now. "You saved my life, Jae-hyun. You don't have to apologize for that." He leaned into her touch for a fleeting second, a moment of weakness he allowed himself only because the darkness hid them. Then the walls went back up. He opened his door. "Come, we need to get inside and clean these wounds. The night is far from over." They exited the car, the salty sea air hitting them instantly. Amara walked barefoot on the wet pavement, the cold biting at her skin, but she didn't complain. She followed the man in the torn suit toward the warehouse, stepping out of the frying pan and into the unknown fire. The coup had taken his kingdom, but in the shadows of the shipping yard, the king and his queen were still standing. The inside of the warehouse was a cavern of shadows and rusted steel, smelling of brine and old diesel. Jae-hyun led Amara up a rattling metal staircase to a suspended office that had been converted into a makeshift living quarter. It was Spartan compared to the opulence of the Velvet Lotus. A single cot, a metal desk with a dusty laptop, a kitchenette, and a wall of monitors that were currently dark. He flipped a breaker switch, and the room was bathed in the harsh, yellow hum of industrial lighting. Jae-hyun hissed in pain as he tried to peel off his suit jacket. The fabric had adhered to the wound on his shoulder, the blood drying into a sticky, dark crust. He stumbled slightly, the adrenaline finally crashing, leaving behind the raw reality of his injuries. Amara didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the cold linoleum, and gently pushed his hands away. "Let me," she said, her voice firm but quiet. He looked at her, ready to protest, to maintain the facade of the untouchable boss, but the exhaustion in his eyes betrayed him. He nodded once and let his arms drop to his sides. Amara worked the jacket off carefully, wincing in sympathy as the movement pulled at his skin. Underneath, his white dress shirt was ruined, soaked in crimson. She unbuttoned it with steady fingers, revealing a torso that was a map of his violent history. Faint, silver scars crisscrossed his chest and ribs, old stories written in flesh. But the fresh wound on his shoulder was angry and weeping. "It's not deep," she assessed, examining the gash where the bullet had grazed the muscle. "But it needs cleaning and stitching." "There is a kid under the sink," Jae-hyun rasped, moving to sit on the edge of the cot. He watched her move across the room. In her torn evening gown, with her hair coming loose from its bun, she looked like a fallen angel amidst the industrial grime. He felt a pang of guilt so sharp it nearly breathless him. He had brought this chaos to her doorstep. Amara returned with a first aid box and a bottle of clear spirits she found in the cupboard. She knelt between his legs, the intimacy of the position undeniable. "This is going to sting," she warned, soaking a cloth in the alcohol. "I can handle it," he murmured. But when she pressed the cloth to the wound, his entire body seized, his hand gripping the edge of the mattress until his knuckles turned white. He didn't make a sound, but his breathing hitched. Amara worked efficiently, her hands gentle but sure. "My brother used to get into scraps on the south side," she said, filling the silence to distract him. "I learned early that hospitals ask too many questions. You learn to be your own doctor." Jae-hyun looked down at her. "You are full of surprises, Amara. I thought I hired a jazz singer, not a field medic." "You hired a survivor," she corrected, glancing up. Their eyes met, and the air in the small room suddenly felt heavy, charged with a magnetic pull that had nothing to do with the danger outside. Her hand lingered on his bare chest, just over his heart, which was beating a slow, steady rhythm against her palm. "Why did you keep me?" she asked softly. "You could have fired me months ago. You have plenty of singers who would kill for that stage. Why me?" Jae-hyun remained silent for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. He reached out with his uninjured arm, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "Because you were the only real thing in my life," he confessed, his voice low and rough. "In my world, everyone wears a mask, everyone wants something, but when you sing, there is no lie. I needed that. I needed to know that beauty still existed somewhere." Amara's breath caught in her throat. She leaned into his touch, the barrier between employer and employee dissolving completely. "And now," he whispered, "I just want to keep you alive." He leaned in, and for a heartbeat, Amara thought he would kiss her. She wanted him to, but he pulled back abruptly, a shadow crossing his face as his survival instincts kicked back in. He stood up, breaking the connection, and walked over to the desk. He needed to focus. He needed to be the ghost again. "I need to know the extent of the damage," he said, his voice returning to that cool, commanded tone, though it lacked its usual bite. He opened the laptop and began typing rapidly. Amara stood up, washing her hands in the small sink, watching his back. She felt the loss of his warmth immediately. "What are you looking for?" "The security feeds," Jae-hyun explained, his eyes scanning the lines of code. "The Lotus has cameras that are not on the main network, hidden eyes that only I can access. I need to see who opened the doors. I need to know who sold me out." A few seconds later, a grainy black and white video feed popped up on the screen. It was a recording from an hour ago. Amara walked over to stand behind him, looking over his shoulder. On the screen, the back entrance of the club was visible. A figure walked into the frame, a man in a sharp suit. He walked to the keypad, punched in a code, and disabled the alarm. Then he opened the door and waved the tactical team inside. Amara gasped. "Is that Kang?" Jae-hyun finished, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. He stared at the screen, his face unreadable, but Amara could feel the radiation of his fury. Kang was his right hand, his brother in everything but blood. They had come up from the gutters together. "He didn't just let them in," Jae-hyun said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He orchestrated it. He knew the shift changes. He knew the blind spots." He slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. He braced his hands on the desk, his head hanging low. "I have lost the Lotus. I have lost my men, and the man I trusted with my life is the one holding the knife." "You haven't lost everything," Amara said, stepping close to him again. She placed a hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. "You're still here. You're still breathing." Jae-hyun turned to face her, his eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying resolve. "Breathing is not enough. I need to burn it down. If Kang wants the throne, I will make sure he inherits a graveyard." He walked over to a metal locker in the corner of the room and yanked it open. Inside was a small arsenal: assault rifles, handguns, boxes of ammunition, and stacks of cash. He began loading a magazine into a pistol, his movements mechanical. "You stay here," he told her. "There is a boat at the dock. In the morning a man named Mr. Choi will come. He is a smuggler, but he is honest. Give him this code," he wrote a number on a scrap of paper, "and he will get you out of the country. Go back to Chicago, Amara. Forget you ever met me." Amara snatched the paper from his hand and crumpled it up, throwing it on the floor. "No," Jae-hyun froze. "What did you say?" "I said no," she repeated, her voice rising. "I'm not getting on a boat. I'm not running away while you go on a suicide mission. You said I was under your protection. You said we were in this together." "This is not a jazz set, Amara," he shouted, stepping into her space, trying to intimidate her. "This is war. You will get hurt. You will get killed." "I was almost killed tonight already," she shouted back, standing her ground toe-to-toe with the most dangerous man in Seoul. "I'm already in it, Jae-hyun. You think Kang is just going to let me go? I'm the loose end. I'm the witness. The only way I survive is if you win." She softened her voice, reaching out to touch the gun in his hand, lowering it. "And you can't win alone. You're hurt. You're emotional. You need someone to watch your back." Jae-hyun stared at her, stunned by her ferocity. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that captivated him on stage, but now it was burning for him. He realized then that he couldn't send her away, not because she would be in danger, but because he didn't want to be without her. "I cannot promise you will survive the night," he said, his voice strained. "I didn't ask for a promise," Amara replied, picking up a smaller handgun from the locker. She checked the weight of it, her expression grim. "I asked for a plan." Jae-hyun let out a short, incredulous breath that was almost a laugh. He looked at the woman he loved. He realized it now in the shadow of death and nodded. "Okay, we don't go back to the Lotus. That is what they expect. We go to the source. We go to Kang's home." He grabbed a fresh shirt from the locker, wincing as he pulled it on, covering the bandage. He tossed a heavy black trench coat to Amara. "Put this on. It will be cold." They stood there for a moment, armed and weary, two outcasts in a rusted metal box at the edge of the world. Jae-hyun loaded a final clip and looked at Amara. "If we do this, there is no turning back." "Then let's not turn back," she said. He opened the door and they stepped out into the rain, leaving the safety of the warehouse behind. The hunter became the hunted, and the ghost of Seoul was coming for his pound of flesh. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour by the time they reached Pyeongchangdong, the wealthy enclave nestled in the foothills of the mountains overlooking Seoul. This was where the city's elite slept, behind high stone walls and iron gates, far removed from the neon chaos below. Kang's residence was a modern fortress of concrete and glass, perched precariously on a ridge. Jae-hyun parked the stolen sedan a quarter-mile down the winding road, tucking it behind a cluster of pine trees. He killed the lights, plunging them into absolute darkness save for the storm. "He will have guards at the front gate and the perimeter," Jae-hyun whispered, checking his weapon one last time. The pain in his shoulder had settled into a dull, throbbing burn, a constant reminder of his mortality. "We go over the west wall. The sensors there have a blind spot. I installed them myself." Amara nodded, clutching the heavy trench coat tighter around herself. The gun in her pocket felt like a cold, dead weight, alien and terrifying. "Lead the way," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. They moved through the trees like shadows, the sound of their footsteps masked by the thunder rolling overhead. At the wall, Jae-hyun laced his fingers together to boost her up. Amara scrambled over the wet stone, dropping silently onto the manicured grass on the other side. Jae-hyun followed, landing with a grace that defied his injury. They crouched low behind a row of sculpted hedges, watching the patrol pattern of two men armed with submachine guns. Jae-hyun signaled for Amara to stay put. He waited until the guards turned the corner, then moved. He was a blur of motion, closing the distance in seconds. He didn't use his gun. Silence was still their only advantage. He struck the trailing guard with the butt of his pistol, a brutal, efficient blow to the temple. As the man crumpled, the second guard turned, but Jae-hyun was already there, choking him out before he could raise a shout. It was over in 10 seconds. He waved Amara over. She ran to him, avoiding looking at the bodies on the wet grass. "The house," Jae-hyun breathed, pointing to the sliding glass doors of the terrace. "He will be in the study, second floor." They approached the house. The lights were dim inside. Jae-hyun used a glass cutter from his pocket to slice a perfect circle in the sliding door, reaching in to unlock the latch. They slipped inside, the warmth of the house hitting them instantly. It smelled of expensive leather and stale cigar smoke, Kang's brand. They moved through the silent living room, up the floating staircase, every creak of the floorboard sounding like a thunderclap to Amara's heightened senses. At the top of the stairs, double oak doors stood slightly ajar. A beam of warm light spilled out onto the hallway floor. Jae-hyun pressed his back against the wall, motioning for Amara to stay behind him. He pushed the door open with the barrel of his gun and stepped into the room. "I was wondering how long it would take you," a voice called out, calm and amused. Kang was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't look like a man in the middle of a coup. He looked like a man enjoying a quiet evening. He wasn't wearing a tactical vest or holding a weapon. He was wearing a silk robe. Jae-hyun walked into the room, leveling his gun at Kang's chest. Amara followed, keeping her own weapon raised, her eyes darting around the room for other threats. "Get up," Jae-hyun commanded, his voice vibrating with restrained fury. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't paint this wall with your brains right now." Kang took a slow sip of his drink, setting the glass down with a soft clink. "Because you want answers, Jae-hyun. You always were the thinker, the strategist." He leaned back, lacing his fingers over his stomach. "And because you know deep down that this was inevitable." "Inevitable?" Jae-hyun scoffed, stepping closer. "We built this empire together. We were brothers." "We were," Kang agreed, his expression hardening. "Until you went soft. Look at you. You're running around in the rain with a lounge singer, bleeding on my carpet while the Busan faction tears apart our territory. You lost your edge, Jae-hyun. You started caring about legacy, about legitimacy. You started caring about her." He gestured dismissively at Amara. "The ghost of Seoul became a ghost of himself. I did what had to be done to save the syndicate." "You sold us out to butchers," Jae-hyun spat. "You didn't save the syndicate, you handed it over to scavengers." "I made a deal," Kang corrected. "A partnership. One that requires a leader who isn't distracted by romance." He looked at Amara then, his eyes cold and assessing. "You should have stayed in Chicago, Ms. Jones. You are a very expensive liability." Amara stepped forward, her anger overriding her fear. "I'm not the liability, Kang. I'm the one pointing a gun at you while you sit there in your bathrobe." Kang chuckled darkly. "You have spirit, I'll give you that." He looked back at Jae-hyun. "Here is the offer, brother, because I still have some respect for what we built. Walk away. Take the girl, take the offshore accounts I haven't frozen yet, and leave Korea tonight. Disappear. If you do that, you live. And if I refuse, Jae-hyun asked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Then you die here, Kang said simply. He pressed a small button on his desk. Instantly, the heavy oak doors behind them slammed shut, the electronic locks engaging with a loud thud. At the same time, the bookshelves lining the walls of the study rotated, revealing not books but armed men, 4 of them, their weapons trained on Jae-hyun and Amara. It was a trap. It had been a trap from the moment they climbed the wall. Jae-hyun didn't flinch. He grabbed Amara and pulled her behind a heavy marble pillar near the fireplace just as the room erupted in gunfire. Bullets chipped away at the stone, sending dust and debris flying into the air. Amara screamed, ducking low, clutching her gun. He knew, she yelled over the deafening noise. He knew we were coming. He knows me too well, Jae-hyun gritted out, firing 2 shots blindly around the pillar to suppress the attackers. I was predictable. What do we do? Amara cried, the smell of drywall dust and gunpowder choking her. Jae-hyun looked at her, his eyes wild but focused. They were pinned down, outnumbered, and trapped in a room with no exit. The window behind the desk was bulletproof glass. He knew because he had recommended the contractor to Kang years ago. We have to break the standoff, Jae-hyun said rapidly. They have the angles, we need a distraction. He looked at the fireplace. It was gaslit, decorative, but the gas line. Amara, he said, gripping her arm. Do you trust me? I'm here, aren't I? She shouted back. I'm going to blow the gas line. It will create a fireball. When it blows, we run for the balcony door. The glass there isn't reinforced, it's just double-paned. That's suicide. Staying here is suicide. Jae-hyun turned and fired 3 precise shots into the gas valve next to the fireplace logs. A hiss of escaping gas filled the air, audible even over the gunfire. He grabbed a heavy brass lighter from a side table, another of Kang's affectations, lit it and looked at Amara. On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. He tossed the lighter into the fireplace and threw himself over Amara, shielding her body with his own. The explosion was a concussive force that shook the entire room. A wave of heat and orange flame roared outward, knocking the gunmen off their feet and shattering the tranquility of the study. The shockwave blew the marble pillar apart. Go, Jae-hyun roared, hauling Amara up. Through the smoke and confusion, they sprinted toward the balcony doors. Kang was on the floor behind his desk, coughing, shouting orders that were lost in the ringing of ears. Jae-hyun didn't bother opening the door. He simply lowered his shoulder and rammed through it, shattering the glass and spilling them out onto the rain-slicked balcony. The cold air hit them like a slap. They were on the 2nd floor, the drop to the patio below about 15 feet. Jump, Jae-hyun commanded. They vaulted over the railing, plummeting into the darkness. They landed hard on the wet grass, rolling to absorb the impact. Amara felt a sharp pain in her ankle, but adrenaline masked it. To the car, Jae-hyun yelled, pulling her up. They scrambled toward the tree line as shots began to ring out from the shattered balcony above. Bullets tore up the turf around their feet. They reached the stolen sedan, breathless and battered. Jae-hyun threw himself into the driver's seat, jamming the key in. As the engine roared to life, Amara looked back at the house. Flames were licking out of the study window, illuminating the figure of Kang standing on the balcony, watching them. He wasn't shooting, he was just watching. He's not following, Amara panted, clutching her chest. He doesn't have to, Jae-hyun said grimly, spinning the car around and tearing down the mountain road. He thinks he has won, he thinks he scared us off. Did he? Jae-hyun looked at her, his face streaked with soot and blood, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. No, he just made his final mistake. He destroyed the only home I had left. Now I have nothing to lose. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a sleek black phone, a burner he had stashed. He dialed a number. Who are you calling? Amara asked. The Busan faction, Jae-hyun said, his voice cold as the grave. Kang made a deal with them. But loyalty in the underworld is bought, and I am about to make them a better offer. He looked at Amara. We are not running, Amara. We are going to finish this. Tonight. The drive back to the city was a blur of neon and wet asphalt, a surreal mirror of their flight only hours before. But the dynamic inside the battered gray sedan had shifted. They were no longer prey running for cover. They were predators returning to the hunt. Jae-hyun drove with one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the burner phone. His voice a low, rapid stream of Korean that Amara couldn't understand, but the tone lethal, transactional, final, needed no translation. He wasn't begging the Busan faction for mercy. He was selling them the future. "It is done," Jae-hyun said, tossing the phone onto the dashboard as they crossed the Han River Bridge. The storm was finally breaking, the heavy clouds fracturing to reveal a bruised, purple pre-dawn sky. "What did you give them?" Amara asked, watching the city skyline grow closer. "Everything they wanted," he replied without hesitation. "The shipping routes, the drug distribution channels, the port authority contacts. I gave them the empire." Amara stared at him, stunned. "You gave it all away to save us." "To save you," he corrected, glancing at her. "And to buy the one thing Kang didn't think I had, time. I kept the Lotus. And I kept the ledger of corrupt officials. I may not be the King of Seoul's underworld anymore, Amara, but I am still the man who knows where the bodies are buried. That is enough leverage to keep us alive." They pulled up to the rear alley of the Velvet Lotus. It was quiet now. The police tape from the earlier shootout was flapping in the wind, but the heavy black SUVs of Kang's personal guard were parked out front. Kang was inside, claiming his prize, likely drinking Jae-hyun's rarest scotch in victory. Jae-hyun reached into the back seat and pulled out the tactical shotgun he had taken from the safe house. He checked the load. "Stay in the car," he told her. "Not a chance," Amara said, checking her own pistol. Her hands were steady now. The fear had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. "We started this on that stage, we finish it there." Jae-hyun looked at her, a flicker of pride warring with his protective instinct. He nodded once. "Stay close, do not hesitate." They moved to the service door. The electronic lock had been bypassed. Inside, the club was eerie. The house lights were up, stripping away the mystery and leaving the velvet booths looking tired and stained. In the center of the main floor, Kang stood surrounded by a dozen of his loyal soldiers, raising a glass to the empty room. "To the new era," Kang shouted, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "It's going to be a short reign, Kang," Jae-hyun's voice cut through the air. He stepped out from the shadows of the mezzanine, Amara right beside him. The soldiers instantly raised their weapons, a dozen barrels trained on the two figures standing above them. Kang laughed, spreading his arms wide. "Look at this. The ghost returns to haunt his own grave, and he brought his pet. You have no army, Jae-hyun. You have no power. You are just a man with a death wish." "I don't need an army," Jae-hyun said calmly, walking down the stairs, his shotgun resting casually on his shoulder. "I have a phone." As if on cue, the side doors of the club burst open, but it wasn't the police. It was a swarm of men in dark suits, wearing the red lapel pins of the Busan Syndicate. They flooded the room, their weapons raised, not at Jae-hyun but at Kang's men. Kang's smile faltered. "What is this? I have a deal with Chairman Park." "Had," Jae-hyun corrected, reaching the bottom of the stairs. "I made him a better one. I gave him the territory. You were just a middleman, Kang, and middlemen are expendable." The realization hit Kang like a physical blow. His men looked around nervously, realizing they were vastly outnumbered. One by one, they lowered their weapons, stepping away from Kang. Loyalty in this world was currency, and Kang was bankrupt. "Traitors!" Kang screamed, his face twisting into a mask of pure rage. "I am the king." In a spasm of desperation, Kang whipped a pistol from his waistband. He didn't aim at Jae-hyun. He aimed at Amara, the one target he knew would hurt Jae-hyun the most. Time seemed to slow down. Jae-hyun lunged, shouting her name, but he was too far away. Amara saw the barrel turn toward her. She didn't freeze. She didn't scream. She remembered the weight of the gun in her hand, the recoil she had felt in the practice range of her mind 1,000 times in the last few hours. She raised her weapon and fired. Bang! The shot was deafening. Kang jerked backward, his own shot going wild, shattering a bottle of champagne on the bar. He crumbled to the floor, clutching his chest, a look of utter shock frozen on his face. He hit the ground and didn't move. Silence descended on the room. The Busan men lowered their guns. Jae-hyun stood frozen for a second, looking at Kang's body, then whipped around to Amara. Amara, he breathed, rushing to her, checking her for wounds. Are you hit? She was shaking now, the adrenaline dumping out of her system. She dropped the gun, the metal clattering loudly on the floor. I got him. Jae-hyun pulled her into a crushing embrace, burying his face in her neck. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a disintegrating world. You saved us. The leader of the Busan faction stepped forward, nodding respectfully to Jae-hyun. The chairman sends his regards, Mr. Min. The city is ours, the club is yours as agreed. Get him out of here, Jae-hyun said, gesturing to Kang's body without looking. And tell Park that if he crosses the river, the truce ends. The men moved quickly, clearing the room of the living and the dead. Within minutes, Jae-hyun and Amara were alone in the vast, empty club. The sun was fully up now, beams of dusty light cutting through the smoke and gloom. Jae-hyun walked over to the bar, poured 2 glasses of water and brought them to the table where they had sat only hours, lifetimes ago. He sat down heavily, wincing as his shoulder wound protested. Amara sat opposite him. She looked at her hands, there was gunpowder residue on her fingers. It's over, she whispered. The war is over, Jae-hyun agreed. He reached across the table and took her hands, covering the stains with his own. But everything else has changed. I'm not the ghost of Seoul anymore. I have no empire, just this building and some money in a Swiss account. You have your life, Amara said, squeezing his hand. And you have your soul. You didn't become him. Jae-hyun looked at her, his dark eyes soft and vulnerable in a way the world would never see. I have you, if you will still have me. I know this is not the life you dreamed of when you came to Korea. Amara looked around the club. It was battered, bullet-riddled, and stained with bad memories. But as she looked back at Jae-hyun, the man who had burned down his world to keep her safe, the man who looked at her as if she were the sun itself, she knew the answer. I didn't come here for a quiet life, Jae-hyun, she said, a small, tired smile touching her lips. I came for the music, and the music is better when it's a little dangerous. Jae-hyun stood up and pulled her to her feet. He didn't lead her to the exit. He led her to the stage. He picked up the microphone stand, righted it, and placed it in front of her. Then he sat at the grand piano, which had miraculously survived the night unscathed. He played a chord, a soft, jazzy minor seventh that hung in the quiet air. One song, he said softly, for the new era. Amara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, inhaling the scent of rain, old wood, and new beginnings. She opened her mouth and began to sing. Her voice was raspy, tired, but richer than it had ever been, filled with the raw, undeniable truth of survival. As the sun flooded the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the former mafia boss and the jazz singer made the only kind of music that mattered. The sound of 2 people who had walked through hell and come out the other side, hand in hand. The Velvet Lotus was open for business.